Parshas Bahar. This week's Parsha begins by introducing the halachos, the laws of Shemitah, of the requirement that on the sabbatical year, which is every seventh year in a 7-year cycle, that there's a requirement to allow the land to lay fallow and not to work the land. So you have 6 years. Sheish shonim tizras adecha, v'sheish shonim tizmor karmecha. You can sow and work your fields, your vineyards for 6 years, and then on the 7th year, you let it lay fallow. So this could be scary, because what do you do if you're observing the laws of Shemitah, and you might be afraid that you won't have anything to eat? Well, in fact, this fear is validated in the Torah, in Perek Chavhei Pasuk Chav, that's 25:20. The Torah says, "V'chi somru," and if you say, "Manochal b'shana hashvi'is," what will we eat in the 7th year? Hein lo nizrav lo nasofes tivosenu. We will neither sow nor collect our produce. So what are we going to eat? The Torah gives the answer in the following verse, in Chaf Aleph, which is verse 21. The Torah says, this is in God's name, "Vitzivisi es birchasi lachem b'shana hashishis," and I will command my blessing for you in the 6th year. V'asas es hatvua l'shlosh hashanim, and it will make produce for the 3 years. The 3 years, the commentaries say, generally, there's some dispute over it, but they say it's the end of the 6th year, the entire 7th year, and the beginning of the 8th year, when you're no longer, when you still don't have an opportunity to collect the produce from the 8th year. But nevertheless, in the 6th year, you will have so much. The produce will be so bountiful that it will carry over until you can start harvesting your crops again. So Rav S.R. Feinstein asked a question. This is actually implicit in a number of other meforshim. Why does the Torah have to say, "V'chi somru manochal b'shana hashvi'is hein lo nizrav lo nasofes tivosenu"? Why does the Torah need to articulate the fear, the question, what are we going to eat? We're not plowing, we're not reaping. Why can't the Torah simply say, you will, for 6 years you will work, on the 7th year you let the land rest, it will lay fallow, and I will command my blessings so that you're covered. What is the need to articulate the fear? So Moshe Feinstein says, and it's reflected in some of the meforshim as well, and Chazal, that there are actually 2 ways that a person could survive a year without planting. One of them is that you have so much, as the Torah describes in the simple way of viewing it, that you will have so much that you will fill up your storehouses, and you're going to have to take out all the old because there's going to be so much that's left. So that addresses the issue about how do we replicate the produce without working. There's another way to be satisfied during that period of the absence of a normal produce, and that is if your food actually is more powerful within you, that is, that it takes less food to give you the result. And Chazal talk about this, that the food is nisbarach b'meyav, becomes blessed within a person's belly. The meaning of this is you're not going to have to eat so much. In other words, there are 2 ways to address not having normal produce by regular farming in the 7th year. One is that you get an abundance before that 7th year, or that you can make do on less. And Rav Moshe Feinstein suggests that these 2 approaches really depend on the level of bitachon, of confidence and trust that a person has in God. If a person has complete confidence, then he says, God's going to take care of me. I'm not worried. Don't worry, be happy, let's get going. And he'll do what he has to do. And Chazal say that the 7th year, when people are batel mimelachtom, when the farmers are no longer working the field, that what they should be doing is engaging in spiritual matters, learning full-time. They're in kolel. So one way is to just do nothing and to have confidence that God will provide. The other, which is a lesser level, says Rav Moshe, is, people are still keeping Shemitah, so that's a certain level of bitachon. But he says this is somebody who needs to see nature operating the way it normally does. Okay, for that person, he's going to get a lot of crops. He's going to have to pay the price. What's the price? The price is he's going to have to be busy. He's going to have to store things. He's going to have to rearrange his warehousing. He's going to have to plan, where do I put everything? How do I take it out? How do I cycle it out, etc. In other words, he's involved. He may not be planting and he may not be reaping, but he's still managing his treasure, if you will, as opposed to somebody who has what Rav Moshe considers to be a higher level of bitachon, a higher level of confidence in the Almighty, which is God says to lay fallow. I'll let it lay fallow. I'm sure that God will provide. Okay, that's one approach. Now, a question is, why would somebody say in the 7th year, and keep in mind, it says, V'chisamru, ma nochal b'shana shvi'is. If you say, what will we eat in the 7th year? Hein lo nizrav lo nasof. We will not have planted, and we will not have reaped. The question is, why are you saying this in the 7th year? In the 7th year, you're eating what's been produced in the 6th year. That is always the case. We consume after we produce. So why is a person saying that in the 7th year? So the Ramban addresses this, and he actually says that in the 7th year modifies v'chisamru. And if you say, and he says that you could theoretically rearrange the words. If you say in the 7th year, what will we eat? Okay, so that explains it according to the Ramban, meaning what will we eat in the 8th year? It's an elliptical phrase. The Yakar says that this is an example of what Chazal say, Eno dome mi sheyesh lo pas b'salo mi she'en lo. You can't compare somebody who has the proverbial bread in his basket to somebody who doesn't. Somebody has bread in his basket, so he doesn't worry as much about what tomorrow will bring because he's good. He's got his bread. But if there's a problem on the horizon that's looming and you don't have the answer right away, so then even if you're able to eat now, but it could cause distress for the farmer, and the response is unsettling. So what do? How do you handle this? Well, one way to handle it would be to minimize what you eat during the 7th year, to basically ration your food and limit your intake artificially because you're worried. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the Almighty says, don't be worried. I will provide for you. Now, there is, according to the Malbim, it would seem that the Malbim doesn't agree with the premise of Rav Feinstein, that there are two approaches here, because he says, Ki somru, v'chi somru manochal. And when you will say, what will we eat? And he says, ki, Chazal say, the word ki can serve in to have four different meanings. Here, it would either be if, that, or when. And the Malbim says, in this case, if it were to mean if, then the Torah would be more precisely express that as im somru, if you will say. But it doesn't say that. It says v'chi somru. And that is, according to the Malbim, when you will say. In other words, it's inevitable. That's how people think. People who live, we're not angels. We're human beings. We're flesh and blood, and we live in a flesh and blood world. So it will happen. A person will say that. And in a sense, you could even reconcile this with Rav Feinstein, in the sense that there are different levels of emunah depending on the engagement that a person has in the world. If a person's nature is to be less engaged in the world, then his concern is less for what he is going to produce. He might have a concern. It's not articulated in the Torah, but he certainly doesn't have the same level of concern as a person who has more of an inclination to work and more of an inclination to produce the fruits of his own labor. The Rav elsewhere says that we appreciate the significance of the year of laying fallow if we actually do work during the 6 years before. But if somebody's not working, then not working on the 7th year doesn't mean much. The Chassam Sofer has a unique approach to this. He says that most people, farmers, if they want to make sure that the land is not depleted of its nutrients, then it will rotate the crops and will alternate fields. 1 year fallow, 1 year producing, 1 year fallow, 1 year producing. The very act of sheish shanim tizrach sadecha, sheish shanim tizmor karmecha, the very act of working straight for 6 years in itself, says the Chassam Sofer, is a demonstration of a person's bitachon in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, demonstration of his confidence that God will provide, because he's not letting the land lay fallow intermittently during those 6 years. He's working it straight because he knows God will restore that power to the land in the 7th year, just like he does for us when we observe the Shabbos. We work hard, and then Shabbos restores us, restores our vision, says the Gemara. In other words, where our perspective is renewed on this perspective on what's really important, and we have an opportunity to focus on Torah. That's true about Shabbos 1 day out of 7 in the week, and it's true about Shemitah 1 year out of 7 in the cycle, and it's all geared towards having a balanced life of being involved in this world and not losing sight of what's really important. Have a good Shabbos.